Start or wait? What's the story?
I think we can start. Students will keep joining, so we can just start.
Okay. So thank you everyone for being there. Today I'm delighted to introduce Amash from Transverse. So you've probably heard us saying a lot. Ashwini has been saying a lot about a number of projects we are calling India Pulse, which is to be able to look at economic and other social activity in real time, which means looking at data in real time. Now, the thing with data is that if I just show you data, is nothing, right? Doesn't mean much. How you put the data together and visualizes is where the insights come from. And we know there are many techniques for visualizing data. We know how to do graphs, we know how to do charts, and so on and so forth. But here, the important thing is that the data itself is being extracted in real time, and then we have to put it together to show it in a form that makes sense to give us insights. So that's one thing. And the second is creative ideas come when you make connections. When you look at some things and you visualize some things simultaneously, and you can see, this is what's going on here, and this is what's going on here. So now we need to be able to look at data and be able to make those connections. That, if I did this intervention, this is what is happening. So that requires new tools. It's no longer first you collect the data, then you run a regression, and then you do the analysis. All of this sort of needs to happen in real time, and for which we need more techniques. So today's talk is really about Transfer, who have been working in this field for over 10 years now, developing those tools. So today what they're going to do is they are going to give us sort of the basic version of what those tools look like, and they will show us some examples of how they use those tools. So please take it away, Amash. One more thing, let me say, if you have like a clarifying question, just raise your hand. And Sangeeta, if you see somebody's hand is raised, you can unmute them and then you can ask your question. But if your question is sort of a very deep question, like what does data really mean? Is it going to destroy my identity or not? I would say wait until the end of the talk for the philosophically deep questions. But if the question is, I didn't understand how that worked, please raise your hand. And I will do the same. Amash, if you don't mind, if I don't understand something, I will stop you and ask you questions. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, great. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. In fact, it was a suggestion from Professor Bhagwan to talk about the kind of work that we have been doing with data, with different governments, particularly oriented around policy making, how data is useful, how data is collected, and how is it, in fact, helping the decision makers take the right decisions. So let me just share my screen to help you see what I'd be taking you through in this talk. So essentially, I'll be talking mostly on spatial analysis for decision making, and why I want to focus on this topic is that most of these decisions that business leaders or the government needs to take are oriented around location. Location is actually one of the key components that drives decisions in many sectors. If I look at data sets today that need analysis for the purpose of any key or crucial decision making, almost 80% of that data set would essentially have a location component. Either it would be a location a lat long or a point on a map, or it could be an area or a region that would essentially generate insights for my decision making. And some of the key sectors, apart from government, which deal a lot in decision making using location intelligence, are sectors like real estate, where you actually need to analyze a lot of inputs that influence real estate pricing, that influence the supply chain of the real estate, and also the supply chain logistics. Last mile delivery, the services that actually need precise location data for delivering and optimizing the supply chain for door-to-door deliveries. So many of these sectors, since now have location as one of the key components for decision making, it becomes essentially it becomes essential, in fact, to contextualize the analysis around location. So let me start with one of the very interesting case studies where we worked initially last couple of years ago, and it was with Delhi. So a couple of years ago, Delhi government toyed with the idea of data-driven policy making, and this has become a buzzword these days. And a lot of governments and development sector agencies are talking about data-driven policy making. Now, when we talk about Delhi, we are talking about a huge scale. We are talking about almost 4 million households. We are talking about millions of residents. And in order to achieve high quality data, or in order to get that high quality data to perform a data driven policy making exercise, the kind of volume of such data collection is huge. So we are talking about millions of households, millions of residents, and if I need to collect data on at such a scale, it would actually be costly in terms of time as well as money. And traditionally, when the census processes were being carried out, when the socioeconomic surveys typically used to happen, typically these surveys used to be paper driven and interview based surveys, which essentially take a lot of time and effort in finally enabling the governments to actually start using the data. In fact, when you talk about the census exercise, almost the same amount of time is required to process the data and make it readily available for analysis, which is essentially the same time which is required to conduct the surveys and collect the data. We're talking about double the effort of what we could possibly reduce using technology. Apart from that, apart from the field effort that is required to perform contact surveys, Delhi government was looking at an additional 1,600 person months and almost, thousands of, trees possibly, if I want to sort of equate it to the environmental cost of such a survey, to essentially start with a data-driven policy-making exercise. And this tough problem essentially was solved using a very easy tool that the government was able to deploy. And this tool essentially is a DIY form creator, digital form creator tool, which the government could pass on to the enumerators in the field and collect the data. When I talk about the enumerators and the scale of the data collection exercise, I'm talking about almost 8,000 unemployed youth that the government employed, and with a bit of training, their own Android smartphones became data collectors, data collection devices, and these 8,000 people were actually working in their own wards and areas to collect data. They were essentially democratizing data collection, and they were able to facilitate the government with billions of attributes of data sets which were collected for all the households in the state of Delhi. And the time required to accomplish this exercise was hardly 6 months. So we are talking about 3 months of data collection. We are talking about 3 months of analysis. So millions of data points enabled by just one simple tool of crowdsourcing and democratization of data collection. Now, what was the purpose of this data collection and analysis? Essentially, you might have heard about home delivery of government services. So the government there has kickstarted around delivery of around 40 government services, like ration cards and driving licenses, etc. So all of these government services are now enabled using the data that is collected through this platform. A lot of cost saving, environment wise, time wise, effort wise, and the policymakers are now empowered with the data that they need. Now, you might ask, like, what kind of inputs essentially such an exercise would yield. So insights on some of the very, very useful parameters that the government needs on a day-to-day basis were enabled using this data collection exercise. The readily available household data, actually through a plethora of possibilities of visualizing these data sets for numerous inputs. These inputs were on education, on healthcare, on basic infrastructure like drinking water and sanitation, income of migrant workers, insurance penetration, and a lot of such inputs essentially that help them create policies at a granular or a hyper local level. One of the key interesting examples that this analysis threw open was on school dropouts. So this topic was one of the key interest areas of the government, and they actually wanted to sort of understand the nature of dropout cases and from the government schools. And when they were trying to map these dropouts against the background of the families of the kids who dropped out, they found that the migrants essentially from the state of Rajasthan had this issue, which was more prominent than the migrants from any other state in Delhi. So, they were able to create policies which were focused on such target groups in the community, where they were able to improve the statistics on school dropouts in general. And one of the key inputs that this exercise generated also enabled them to take policy level decisions like the free metro rides in Delhi. So this was one of the key inputs that they were able to generate using this data-driven policy making exercise. Now,
so could I stop you and ask you a couple of questions? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
So basically what you're saying now is that instead of collecting data on a paper and pencil format, this was all electronic on the Android devices. And the advantage of that is that you don't have to take the paper and then somebody has to input the data. The input is happening directly, right? That's the major benefit. Do you know how they made sure that the data that was collected was not tampered with, that it was being done properly? Do you know about that at all?
Yes, of course. So using digital modes, there are a lot of checks and data validations that you can enable right at the design level. So
Okay.
actually, I wanted to talk a bit about the platform, and then
Okay. Go ahead, yeah.
Better. So essentially, when we look at the problems of this scale and the whole journey of data, right from data collection to analysis, we are essentially looking at a platform-based approach to solve these problems. And what I mean by platform-based approach is that when I carry out a crowdsourcing or crowdsourced data collection for thematic areas of interest, I should essentially be able to do that using a configurable platform where I can design forms on the fly and disseminate to all these enumerators, or as they are also called, the human human devices or human sensors in the field. So the platform essentially should be able to not only design forms, it should also be able to put in logical checks to validate the data right in the field. How we can do that essentially is, design forms intelligently, and this is something that modern day platforms such as ours enable. So you can actually design forms with validations, with interlinkages, etc. So for example, if you're collecting data on residential units and if there is a commercial unit marked, no question related to residential unit would appear on the device. So it reduces a lot of wrong entries or problematic entries that possibly could creep in when the data collection exercise is carried out. Secondly, the data that is captured also has a location stamp and a timestamp that essentially helps you to uh, helps you to geofence the data that is collected from the field. So if you know that this particular data is to be received from a household in Ward A, and if it is not marked in a residential area in Ward A, location wise, you can actually flag that off as a wrong entry or a default entry. So essentially, there are tools which are powered by machine learning algorithms, which help you to cluster these data sets to recognize which are the outliers. And you can actually use location and timestamp as the major inputs to validate the quality of the data that is written. Yeah.
That's great, thanks. And that problem is very hard to do with the paper one, right?
Exactly.
Here you have to entirely trust whatever somebody jotted down is the right thing, right?
Exactly. And there are many other cases that you can actually do. So essentially, what we
I think Vishal has a question. Is it Vikash or Vishal?
It is Vikas, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead and ask. Yeah, what's your question?
Amresh, I have one question here. I don't know, but did you get data from population or from sample?
No, this was a comprehensive door-to-door survey with 100% coverage.
So this is like a census, really, census type of exercise. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Another factor that could improve the accuracy of data collected is the whole gamification experience that you can get while designing these smart forms. So I'll give you one example, and this is an example from Swachh Bharat Mission. And we are talking about rural Tamil Nadu in an area around Indigal. A team of women powered with digital tools to collect data on on-site sanitation, toilet types, flushing types, etc., were able to collect very accurate data because images and videos were available as multiple choice choices in a multiple choice question. So for example, if I have to collect the data on septic tank type, I can have photographs of septic tank as available as choices, and an enumerator from the community could actually push the correct data by matching what they have seen in the field versus what is available to me as a choice on the image. Secondly, the power of edge computing, which is essentially a regular mobile device, could be enhanced if we use machine learning and feature detection algorithms in the field itself. So if I'm collecting municipal data, for example, municipal infrastructure, if I have a machine learning based model to detect, say, the signboards of commercial units, I should be able to do that readily or easily without any human intervention. What essentially needs to be done is a location and a photograph, and the algorithm does it all. So even these capabilities could essentially augment the quality of data that is taken as inputs. Now, once this data is collected and it has a location component along with it, the second stage of data analysis is essentially preparing the data for analysis. So typically when you collect data from the field, you also need to augment the analysis through secondary data sets. So for example, if I'm working in a city on a planning project and I collected data on land use from various locations, I also need to overlay the existing or the proposed land use as a layer of information atop what I have collected, so that I can combine the visualization from my data which I collected in the field and augment it with the secondary data sets. You can do that using a spatial platform, using a location intelligence integrated platform, which again is a key feature of such a platform that enables decision making. Now, when you have collected data, there are a lot of things that you can possibly do with data, and I would like to sort of showcase some examples of how these data sets could be possibly used in real life use cases. So the snapshot that you're seeing in front of you currently is essentially a thematic map of a state in US. It's an area in Georgia with a few counties around the capital of the state, which is Augusta. And essentially, Augusta is where a lot of economic activity is centered, and the general income of the residents is higher typically in that particular county around Augusta. And as you move away from it, the median income reduces. But how do you establish this fact? So you do that by using a host of spatial analysis tools. You do that by creating buffers of certain radius that by your judgment or by your analysis, you know that this is essentially the zone of high economic activity, and this is and the zone thereafter is an area with lower economic activity, and how you can actually compute median incomes of these areas within each buffer zone around your economic or the centers of economic activity, and how you can actually map out areas weighted on the median income calculated using a spatial analysis. So essentially in this example, what has been done is the individual counties, the boundaries that you see on your screen are mapped as one layer of information. The location of the economic center is mapped, and an analysis using buffer is carried out to ring fence zones with varied intensities or varied densities of economic activity in that area. Secondly, the income parameters or income data sets, which are median income data sets of every county, are overlaid, and these buffer zones essentially help you to identify zones within each county where you see the influence of economic activity on the general income. You can imagine this case study to be replicated on, say, other factors like real estate pricing. So, wherever you have the income data sets available, wherever you can actually plot these buffer zones, you can also overlay them with the real estate pricing. You can overlay with their expenditure patterns on the on consumer goods, and a lot of such interesting factors that you can overlay to perform an analysis or visualization of the effect of such input parameters with location or with geography. Some of the other things that are typically enabled using such data collection platforms and analysis platforms are very interesting enterprise applications. And I'll showcase some of them in this section, wherein the first example is on fecal sludge management. Now, only 38% of our Indian cities are covered under connected sewerage network. So we are looking at a large urban population, and that includes areas in our metropolitan cities also, where the penetration of sanitation network is not there. And essentially these residents depend on on-site sanitation, and the environmental impact of irregular desludging is quite high. And hence, now that the government understands that connecting every household to a connected sewer network is a huge exercise that requires a lot of investment, how can we operationalize, an effective desludging model using technology that can enable decision making on which household needs desludging when, predict predict the location of the household and the time when the particular household would need desludging. Also to schedule these desludging operations, to raise tickets to these desludging operators who would essentially go and collect the sludge from individual households and dispose it at the designated locations. Secondly, these tools which are developed atop location data sets also help the decision makers analyze the desludging patterns. They also help them optimize the routes of movement of these trucks and operationalize an effective desludging mechanism that can actually benefit the city at large. Another example, so this is the dashboard. This is essentially the data-driven dashboard which the governments typically use to monitor the collection of sewerage from individual households and the effective disposal at the treatment sites. So it, when you collect data, when you visualize the data, essentially the last stage of data ops, as it is called, is to enable the data to be used for business applications such as these. Also, not only for operationalizing an enterprise application based on data, but also to help the decision makers visualize where could the possible problem areas be and how they can address it proactively. So
can you show this? Amrish. So this graph shows the orange ones, sort of orange ones are which have not yet been dislodged, right? And the green ones are the ones which are.
Yes. So the platform enables them to schedule the desludging. So the orange ones are the ones which you know for sure that they need desludging, and you can actually schedule your desludging operations based on the location. And the green ones that are the ones where the desludging is already carried out.
Okay. So by looking at this, yeah, okay.
So the dashboard essentially also helps the municipality visualize where the service could not happen, where there were refusals, where there was an emergency desludging that was required, and that helps them iteratively to arrive at a better plan to operationalize an effective fecal sludge management.
Yeah, okay.
Second example is
Siddharth, I think, has a question.
Yes. Hi, Amarsh.
Hi, sir.
So I just wanted to know what the adoption has been like, particularly for the desludging application. I'm guessing you made it using ArcGIS or something like that, right?
No, we didn't use ArcGIS. So here's the catch. So it's actually built on a platform developed in-house at Transurf. So it's essentially a geospatial stack that Transurf has created on its own. The major reason was that the penetration of spatial or location intelligence to small towns, to cities, and widely to most of the user groups has not happened, just because of two reasons. One is the prohibitive cost of the commercial off-the-shelf solutions. And second is the level of customization that you need. We need a solution or a platform which is agile, which is more of DIY than a platform which requires heavy customization. And hence, solutions like FSM could be easily built on a platform which Transurf has built, essentially because of the understanding that we have on the agility that the platform would need to create such applications.
Great. And what has the adoption been like?
Adoption, so we started implementing this in Maharashtra, and we have recently signed up a lot of cities in Tamil Nadu. So it is slowly catching up. So it's basically in government, as we say, it's more of like there has to be the first pioneer or early adopter, and then the other municipalities or the other states then follow. So so essentially we partner with development agencies like Gates Foundation, etc., to implement these solutions.
Got it. Thank you.
Second example is a very interesting example, and this is from Forest Survey of India. Now, essentially, FSI releases the State of Forest report once every 2 years, and you would be surprised to know that until last year, until the previous report, all the data that was collected from different samples across the country by their field crew was on pen and paper. And by digitizing it through a mobile app-based data collection, we were able to operationalize multiple things for FSI. The first thing was essentially good quality data that comes directly to the system. Of course, it's not real time, it is near real time. These are people who are working in zero connectivity areas, but they can sync the offline data collected to the server later. And once the data is received at these zonal offices, they can quickly review it, verify it, and send it to the headquarters to perform real-time analysis. And what I mean by real-time analysis is essentially a dashboard which on real-time gives me key parameters related to my forest inventory management, and these parameters are growing stock, biomass, carbon equivalents, and bamboo parameters. It also gives a feel or a visualization to the Forest Survey of India administrators to actually assess the survey status. And this survey essentially is a huge exercise. We are talking about almost 30,000 sample points collected all across the country in remotest of remote locations in every state. And hence, it becomes imperative to create a platform which not only helps improve the data collection process, it also gives real-time input to an administrator in FSI to know where have I reached until now. Not only that, it also helps to analyze the collected data against the existing data sets. So the visualization that you see in front of your screen right now is a forest cover map. And if I know that I have collected my sample points in specific location on a specific forest cover type, I know that the data generated using satellite image analysis versus the data generated using ground truthing can actually give me a lot of insights and fillers in the gaps that I might have using remote sensing techniques.
So can you explain what are we seeing on this graph?
Yes, so essentially the map in a color-coded pattern shows different forest cover densities. So the green ones are the dense areas, the densely vegetated areas. The yellow ones are the ones where the density of forest was high earlier, but it has been found lower using satellite image analysis. And the red ones are the ones where deforestation has been observed. Now, when I need to plan a ground truthing exercise, I can actually plan a sampling using these inputs Secondly, when the data from ground truthing is received, I can overlay on these maps to see whether the inputs received from a satellite image analysis are true and are they observed on the ground. These inventories typically follow a statistical process, and that process has been emulated on the ground and also on the web for analysis. It also, the dashboard also helps them in effectively calculating the forest cover information. It also helps them in estimating the state forest, because they can't go to every location. They can only collect the sample data sets. So using statistical processes, they can actually estimate the exact or the estimated forest cover in a particular state. Similar applications could be for estate management, for land records and property rights, and there are huge number of cases where you can use spatial data sets or location intelligence using a platform approach or a field to office kind of a workflow. So this is an example from Steel Authority of India where they used spatial analysis to identify encroached areas. The land which was allocated to them 50 to 60 years ago has been encroached heavily, so they can actually analyze what kind of encroachment is there, what has been the trend of encroachment. Using machine learning, they can actually find out what has been the change in the land use on the encroached plots, and this is actually helping them in legal aspects as well. So one of the key consumers of data-driven policy making, data-driven governance and monitoring is city administration. Smart City Mission essentially has created a host of opportunities for cities to develop such platforms. These platforms essentially could be helping them in revenue augmentation. Most of the cities that we have in the country are deprived of funds. Essentially, one of the reasons essentially is the whole control on the revenues that they have, and the problems in underassessment and unassessment of the properties which are supposed to pay property tax to the city. And these gaps could be as huge as 50 to 60% depending on the state where the city is in. And even for the cities where e-governance applications or e-governance ERPs have been rolled out, a spatial intelligence input could actually help them augment the tax demand in better coverage of properties in their property tax registers. So essentially, just to summarize, business leaders and policymakers need a lot of data. Even if you are in an FMCG, you are in banking business, if you need to open a new rural banking branch, a spatial data input could essentially help you in identifying which village cluster that you could possibly target. You can actually map out existing location of existing branches. You can map out census data sets. You can also map or overlay the socioeconomic indicators of these villages to and also the purchase data sets of farm equipments, fertilizer data sets, etc. And then take a decision on where exactly you can open up a new branch in a particular village. So for market research applications, again, most of the tools essentially have been interview-based tools, a face-to-face interview. And with a location input, you could actually map out these inputs which are taken right from the field, and you can visualize them on a map. You can overlay it with various other inputs and parameters to identify or take decisions based on the market research data sets. even for branding and advertising, there is an immense use case of location intelligence. You can actually map the effectiveness of a particular billboard or a hoarding that you've placed, and you can actually use location data to analyze how effective your particular billboards are. Paper-based surveys are not the future. So, I mean, they are time consuming. There is no timestamp. There is no location involved. You essentially spend a lot of time in just massaging or creating that data, or making the data ready for analysis rather than actually performing analysis on top of it. And with improved connectivity that we see today, we see a huge opportunity of crowdsourced data sets that could be powered using location as a key input. And if you want to estimate the capability of a humble mobile device in your hand, you can compare it with the Apollo mission. So the component on an Apollo mission could actually process only few thousands of transactions per second. We're talking about a huge comparison, that huge improvement over such a device on a mobile phone that can process billions of instructions. So yeah, so that is all I wanted to talk about in this session. Yeah.
Questions. So
Yes.
I see something. Mr. Reddy, Ms. Reddy, Shravanya.
Yeah. Hello, Professor.
Yeah,
Hi,
hi.
Harsh.
Hi.
Yeah, I just wanted to know the use cases of this technology in different industries. Let's say industries like manufacturing, IT, or retail, for example. If you can elaborate on that.
So in manufacturing, typically, I have a use case from FMCG typically. So and this is a very recent use case that we worked on, and it was essentially on COVID impact. So a typical manufacturing unit could source raw materials from various sources. And during the first phase of lockdown, first 3 phases of lockdown, they were stuck, as in they wanted to identify places or areas where they could use geographic inputs to overlay green zones, as they were called during the lockdown phase, and overlay that on their suppliers so that they can help their suppliers in augmenting the demand for the raw produce. So this is a very recent use case that we had worked on in manufacturing sector, but there could be plenty of other sources, use cases as well. So one of the key use case that we have seen is in supply chain optimization. Location data and location analytics can help in a big way there.
Okay. Any other questions? Can you tell us a little bit about if somebody, let's say I'm an ISP student and I want to learn about this, what kind of tools should I learn to become good at this kind of analysis?
Sure. So let me just take you to the platform itself, and you can actually I'll share the links post this call. You can visit Transurf.com. What we have here is essentially a platform that can help you in managing or uploading these data sets for your studies. So essentially, these are spatial data files which you can download from open sources. There is a huge repository which is available on data.gov.in, which is an open government repository, and also on numerous other sources where you can download spatial data sets. And these essentially are of 2 types, which are vector and raster data sets. Raster datasets are typically drone images or satellite images, and vector datasets are essentially points, lines, etc. that you see on your map. And on a map session, essentially, you can actually use a variety of tools. You can actually use analysis tools to carry out, say, buffer analysis, like the example that I showed you here. You could also use clustering, you could use interpolation, etc. So there are a host of tools which are available, which you can sort of have a look at. Apart from this, for data collection, there is an easy interface that you can use to create forms. It's a complete DIY. So you can actually create a survey or a data collection form right away on this screen. You can add validations here. You can add single image choice, the kind of use case that I mentioned to you in Tamil Nadu. And you can actually disseminate it or share it with the field devices, or if you are you want to sort of run a crowdsource campaign, you can do it using this platform itself. Apart from this, there are multiple sources of information which are available on online on handling geospatial data sets. And these could be
it would be useful. So when you say there are a lot of sources, everybody says, yeah, of course there are a lot of sources. The problem of the modernity is not that there are no resources. In fact, there are many. In fact, there are too many, right? Is there a book or a website or some resource that you recommend, somebody who wants to start playing with this and start understanding it? Can you recommend 2 or 3 things, and maybe you can send us an email or something with the links?
I'll definitely do that. I'll share that the list of resources with you.
Is that could you guys, let me now see the capabilities of Zoom. If you guys are not sleeping and if you like the idea of seeing this link, press go yes. If you don't like it, say no. Let me see how that shows up. Is there a thing that shows how many people are saying yes or no? Okay, I can see.
In the chat they are writing, but also in where you can see raised hands, you can see the ticks, which is yes.
Yeah, but isn't there in Zoom, doesn't it show up like a quick graph where it shows yeses and nos? No? Anybody know? I can see lots of people have clicked yeses, but is there an easy way of seeing this in Zoom?
There should be a poll option for the host, maybe.
Oh, poll option, right. So I didn't do a poll. I just said, say yes or no. Ah, I see. Okay. Okay. So of course, the way I asked the question, I'm only getting yeses, not no nos, but a lot of people like this idea of, so give us like the first place to start with, because you see what happens with this is once you get one source, they will recommend the second one and the third one, and then it's you get going. Okay. Other questions? I see. No, I'm seeing lots of yeses. I'm not seeing any raised hands.
Bhagwan, I had a follow-up question. Something that
Please go ahead. Yeah, Ashwini.
Amarsh mentioned in passing, but I think that is where the power is. It's not about whether the 2012 handheld phone is 1 million times stronger than the Apollo mission. I mean, that is, it's like saying we only use 10% of our brain. I mean, I'm glad the world is already pretty bad when we use only 10%. So capacity constraints are no longer interesting, or lack of theirs. I think what is interesting is the interactivity, the human machine interactions, and the possibilities that open up, because now the humans don't have to go to the machines, they are carrying the machines with them. And the possibilities. So you use the word crowdsourcing when you were describing your Delhi mission to save trees experiment. I did hear crowdsourcing there. There were volunteers who are actually not volunteers because they were paid to do their jobs. And they were nominated. It was a clearly hierarchical, non-voluntary setting, which doesn't vibe well with the word crowdsourcing. But I think that is where the greatest potential for the kind of things that you do are. And the potential is in terms of people being able to interact with technology on a level of intimacy that is just impossible otherwise.
Sure.
And how do you design systems to use that, such as in crowdsourcing?
So for example, actually, just to say a little bit more, imagine if I created a game, right, in which all those who have downloaded this thing would randomly get a little push that, do something, answer some question. So that way you can randomize and, you can sort of see with a limited sample, you could do lots of interesting things. Yeah, anyway, go ahead. Go ahead and answer Ashwini's question.
Yes, yeah, you're right. So essentially, the Delhi experiment was a volunteer-driven project. But the good thing about the project was that it was the volunteers came from the same community where they were collecting the data. So
am I correct that they were not volunteers, but they were paid to do the job?
Yeah, they were paid, yes.
Okay. Because there is this whole greenwashing thing that goes on, that BP is now very environment friendly. It's similarly happening in government. They pay people and then call them volunteers, which is not true. Because when you pay people, motivations are affected very differently and principal agent problems arise, which are, there are different problems when they are only volunteers. But we need to say it as it is. They are not volunteers.
Sure.
They are
they volunteered to accept the money.
But I would like to talk about the other example, and this is from Odisha, where they passed a new legislation awarding land titles to slum dwellers. And this is also one of its kind. Now, you'd find it interesting that the way the land titles were awarded were they leveraged drone technology to map out these slums, and they actually formed committees within the community, as in it was again a no payment based mechanism. The slum dwellers associations actually involved the community themselves to essentially map out their land parcels on those drone images, because they could see those parcels very, very clearly on a high resolution image. And also to provide their socioeconomic data sets, and also on their land record related data sets to the volunteers which were appointed by the slum dwellers. So such experiments are also happening in parallel. And one of the key beneficiaries of such experiments is land records and property rights, because the way community can itself drive modernization of land records, you cannot do it using the government approach or any other approach. And this has been immensely successful in Africa, in countries like Ghana, where the community is driving such programs themselves.
Just wanted to let you guys know that Amarsh and his team are helping us look at some of this data for India Pulse that Ashwini has started for various different states. For example, we are able to look at different states and see where are the marginalized populations based on, either caste information or per capita income information. But they're able to overlay on top of it to see where the public distribution system actually reached, and other benefits like Manrega. So they're able to create an overlay between where the populations are and where it reached, and more importantly, where it did not reach, even though there was a population. So that gives a clear visualization of where something needs to be done. So they are helping us with that project and other projects as well.
Well, I'll also make a pitch here, because we are a going to announce projects under Jumpstart India at ISB for each of these pulse states. So the design will be a group with smaller teams working at the state level, but also talking to each other, so that we build an architecture that, Transurf builds an architecture for us that is not only customized to Jharkhand or to Tamil Nadu, but can serve cross-state national data purposes as well. So we'll be announcing those projects very soon.
So you have a number of states already lined up, Ashwini?
Yes, Tamil Nadu, Jharkhand, Himachal Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana.
Okay, and more to come as we start to demonstrate the power of this. I'm sure other states would want to join this.
Nobody, so there will be a FOMO. I'm afraid of the FOMO problem. So
Yeah.
there will be 30 states.
So am I seeing a hand, or was this an old hand?
Yes, Professor, it's a hand. So, Amarsh, I wanted to know what are the skills that are required to learn this tool?
So essentially, the pretty much the same skills that you need to do any kind of data analysis. You just need to sort of learn a bit about geographic data sets. That's all. It has so the way the data sets for location analysis have been designed these days are pretty straightforward and pretty compliant with the other kind of data sets that you work for analysis. So
I think, look, Amash, her question is, do I need to know coding? Her question is, do I need to know statistics, econometrics, or just the curious mind?
So
what are you saying?
yeah, so depending on the use cases or your application areas, there are different levels of maturity in this. So essentially, you for a basic analysis, you would essentially need the knowledge of statistics and a bit of location data sets. But if you need to build data apps or dashboards, you would need to learn a bit of coding as well.
What should, if somebody wants to say, oh, this is a good time because we are only taking 2 classes instead of 4, I want to pick up coding, what should they pick?
Python ideally, because I mean it will.
Python.
Yeah, it will help you.
Yeah. By the way, guys, I learned Python on my own, so it's easy to do. There are a lot of resources online. If you need some help, where to look for it, I'm happy to tell you about it. Vikash, is a question?
Yeah, Professor, I have one question. Hi,
Yeah.
Amos. Thank you for this presentation, first of all. So you said that Delhi government got an inference that kids of Rajasthan migrants are, dropping out of school more frequently than any other states, correct?
Yes. That was one of the findings, yes.
So, but can't we get that inference from the schools, just controlled by Delhi government, and Delhi government are operating those schools? So why do insights can be inferred with the current setup without getting census data, which are kind of possible in case of Delhi, but difficult in case of UP, Bihar, or Rajasthan, or where the state is quite big. How do you do in those states, this kind of analysis?
Sure. So the analysis actually boils down to the granularity, or as we call it, the resolution of the problems that we are trying to solve. Like, for example, in the case of Jharkhand Pulse, we have taken village as the smallest level of data input, whereas in Delhi it was a household. So essentially, depending on the problems that you're trying to address, you can choose the resolution. And if you're talking about village level data sets, these are typically available without surveys and from secondary data sources, which you can readily pick up and use. But if you want to carry out an intervention in a city, you would definitely need to go beyond the city level, you need to go to a ward, at least a ward level or a household. And for that, you might need primary data set, depending on the use case.
So Vikash, just to take
Veru had a question. Is that right, Veru?
Veni has a question, but let me just add to what Amar just said. The distinction between primary and secondary data belongs to the last century. I mean, what is secondary, what is primary is no longer easy. A lot of data that we are using is transaction data, simply because now transactions are digital and they are recorded. So we know when that happened, what is the volume, what is the velocity, and so on and so forth. Is it primary data? Nobody is collecting it. It's just being recorded somewhere on a server in a log, right? So it's secondary data, not likely. So the problem is not what name to give to data, whether it is primary or secondary and so on and so forth. The question is whether the same objective can be served in more than one way. And for example, if the only objective was to find out what kinds of people are pulling their children out of school, that could have been done using the DICE data, which is updated annually for every school at the student level for all over India. So we can actually find out who is with names and caste and whatever, everything. But that is the only thing that we would be able to do. But what the Delhi government wanted to do was a 360-degree analysis of each household compared to each other household potentially, or at least at the neighborhood level. That you can only do using primary data that is designed for that purpose. So it depends on what you want to do. It's not that it could not have been done otherwise, that you would have found out that Rajasthan migrants are pulling their children out. But that was not the only thing that
was. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Amos.
Veni.
Veni?
Hi, Professor. Hi, Amarsh. Again, I'm sorry if this has been discussed before, but you were discussing this version of the app, right? So is there a free version we could sort of play with and see what all? And if so, could you just like direct us to where this is?
Yes.
Well, we will have Aadhaar Pulse projects where you will get to play with it.
Yes.
Pulse.
So I'll share the links anyway of the resources as well as the platform, so you can sign up and start using it. It is free for ISB users, so it's essentially a part of the MOU that we have entered into with ISB. So feel free to play around.
Sure, that helps. Thank you.
Okay, I see one more hand. Himanshu?
Hi, Professor. Just a quick question here. Do we see the application of this technology in the mining industry? Illegal mining has been a big concern for the government, and geofencing and maybe geopolitical mapping of vehicles doing the transportation to and from mines leads to loss of revenue for the government and is a big black hole there. So do we see this becoming a mandatory for the trucking company or the miners in the times to come?
Yeah, Himanshu. So it is actually mandatory in many of the states, and Indian Bureau of Mines has already mandated to geographically map the leased mines across the country. And I think most of the work has already been done. Another way of monitoring illegal mining would be using satellite images and drones. So essentially, you can't possibly monitor these irregularities at a ground level, but you can always keep an eye from the sky and use change detection methods to analyze how much of the material has been mined. But typically, these would be useful in open cast mines rather than the in pit mines or the other kind.
Okay, on that note about data mining, the mining data, let's close the session. Thank you all for listening, and thank you, Amar, very much for telling us about your work and your help to ISB and your willingness to serve some of these resources with us. Thank you indeed.
Thank you, Professor. It was a pleasure.
Bye.